questions. One, relation. Janaki Ramji says relationships. Every person is for the first time. I don't. There's some missing word or something. I'll come to it. Then we go to this question by Mr. Suresh. How do we evolve to where you see yourself as a third person? Now, see, this is a very interesting question actually. There are two ways of doing it. Actually, two ways in the sense I'm not suggesting any method, but there is a possibility of loosening the hold of I on me. Loosening the hold. That means don't intensely always continuously feel this sense of I and I only and relate everything to that I. You can loosen that hold. You can actually loosen that hold to a great extent where you cannot you hold on to it too much. Too much of myself, too much of my own being is a great hindrance in this process. So there is this possibility of loosening the hold, and once you loosen the hold, you can dissociate yourself to an extent where you can be an observer of your own self. You can be an observer of your own self, how the I is acting in different situations, in different relationships. So that can happen provided you don't take life too seriously. Too seriously and too personally, if you take life, then you can only be making we can be only making ourselves more and more miserable. So this loosening the hold of I is an important thing, where don't give too much importance to yourself, too much importance to everything you do. Don't do things too seriously also, as though your life and death is dependent on it. The things have been proved now for the past 4 weeks now, almost 3.5 weeks. It has been proved that human beings don't really matter much, and nothing really collapses around you just by being quiet. What I thought was very, very important for me in life, and the race which I was running for several years. Volume. Yeah. So that loosening of the sense of I and becoming an observer of oneself, that is what I think makes one see oneself as a third person. There's a question by Beena Mirchandani ji which says, we have built this collective called society, and more often than not, it is a cause of unhappiness. Is there any value to this society for human growth and evolution? Definitely, Beena ji, there is a value. Otherwise, it would not sustain. See, we have to agree upon certain things where there should be the bare minimum opportunity for survival. Shelter, food, clothing, health, some amount of sanitation, a minimum amount of education. These are all which are very, very essential, and only a society can provide this. That means collectively we would agree to create these facilities and see that there is some kind of an equitable distribution, at least at the base level. But beyond that, if you allow society to shape you, society to make you think in terms in which it wants, make you confined, binds you up in some way, then you are bound to be unhappy. There is bound to be conflict, because if you look at it, we are no different from society. I am the society and the society is me. They are not two separate things. The environment has created me, or what I call as the I. The I is created by this environment because it is the one which has given you the inputs. It is the one which has given you the experiences. It is the one which has given you the knowledge. So this I is actually a creation of society, and we are unfortunately subjectively dissociating ourselves from that society and thinking as the me and the non-me, as the me and the society as though it is something outside me. This interaction between human beings on a continuous basis is what sustains society, isn't it? If that doesn't happen, that particular society, that particular civilization will vanish, will slowly vanish, because it has become unsustainable. So, see, it helps you from one aspect of it, but from a greater perspective, from a different dimension of your own growth and evolution. If you call that dimension as the transcendental dimension or the spiritual dimension, then society can become a great hindrance. Unless society is able to absorb you with your differences and allow you that space to grow and evolve, then there is a conflict between you and the society. But if you are giving that space, then society is also evolving along with you. As individuals evolve, as collectively, as a society, as a nation, as a civilization, we evolve. And the more the level of interaction and the freedom which you have, the greater is the possibility of a particular society or a civilization continuing to thrive for millennia. Somebody says, but we cannot live in isolation. Yeah, that's true. You cannot. You see, there's nothing like, see, all life, as I said, is a relationship, and all life is experiential. You have these two levels of reality where you are living in this relationship, reality of relationship and reality of experience. And obviously, you can't survive in isolation. There is a question from Mr. Ram Shetty. Does transcendent reality refer to meditation? Is there any connection between transcendent reality and meditation? How do we define meditation? It's more important to come to a mutual understanding about this term called meditation. One of the important definitions that is given of meditation is...
The microphone is unmuted.
Yeah, so I think there are some participants who are not muted, and there is some disturbance. Thank you. I think now it's muted. See, unfortunately, our definition of meditation is not very, very clear. What, according to me, is observing ourselves in daily life is a process of meditation. Meditation is not something to be done occasionally, sitting with your eyes closed for about 15-20 minutes, or thinking about certain things only, because that really cannot be called as meditation. Meditation, from a traditional point of view, is limiting the field of your consciousness, limiting the field of your awareness initially with a particular object. With a particular object doesn't necessarily mean something which is tangible, like some idol or something. It could be an idea. It could be a sense of your own experience of what you could call as love or beauty. So the traditional way of looking at it says that if you are able to limit your field of consciousness to a particular thing which is of interest to you, like as I said, an idol could be of interest to you, or an aspect of that idol to which you have attributed so many aspects to it, that love could be one, beauty could be another thing, or harmony could be an idea. So if you are able to limit your consciousness, the field of consciousness to then, and allow that to flower on its own without the interference of your thought. That process is also defined traditionally as dharana and dhyana. I wouldn't like to go much into that because that itself is a separate subject. But yes, you are right. The transcendental reality is much closer to what generally we understand as meditation. And meditation, according to me, is observation of our own self in daily life without the observer becoming too prominent in the process. The observer, if you give too much of prominence or importance to the observer, then you will lose that connection with observation. The observer, when an observer becomes more important, you are always directing that observation. You are always guiding that observation. And you are only observing what the observer wants to observe. So if you are not giving that prominence or importance to the observer, but more importance to the process of observation, it could be something which is an ongoing process and a continuous process in one's own daily life. Now, Janaki Ramji says, relate to every person as a relationship. Relate to every person as if for the first time. Eat every meal as if for the last time. Sant Tukaram. Yeah, very, very interesting ideas. But Janaki Ramji, my only submission is that this again should not be an idea. The idea of relating to every person as though meeting him for the first time should be a reality and not another idea. Because you can't force yourself to see your wife or children as though you are seeing them for the first time and inquiring about their name and who are you, why did you come here kind of thing. They may think that something is wrong with me if I do that. See, the point is, don't carry the burden of memory too much again. Don't carry the burden of your memory too much. Then you are able to allow that newness, that novelty, that freshness to enter into you, which will enable you to see somebody as though you are seeing him for the first time. And that observation, as I said, which is a part of the process of meditation, like mindfulness. Binaji keeps talking about this subject called mindfulness. Suppose when you are eating something, you can become very mindful. You can, fully become aware of what you are eating. Eating each morsel with that sense of enjoyment and allowing the sense of taste and the smell to the odor and the fragrance and the flavor to dominate. When you become mindful in the sense no other disturbance is there, then you have a greater experience. And as I said, it's a question of frequency, intensity, and quality of your experience. So every experience you can make it as an intense experience. Every experience you can make it as a qualitatively different experience. And similarly, if you are able to sustain that and make that as a process in itself, the frequency will also increase and your level of experiencing that reality becomes much more.
I think
meditation is the 6th step of Patanjali. In the Ashtanga Yoga, it is called as the 7th step. In the Ashtanga Yoga, it is called as Dhyana. All these are called as sciences. This is the science of yoga. So when Patanjali talks about these things, he very clearly defines each term. What according to Patanjali is dharana? What according to Patanjali is dhyana? What according to Patanjali is samadhi? He very clearly defines. Because in a science, the scientist has to put forward any new word he brings into the vocabulary, he has to immediately define it clearly. But whether we agree with the definition or not is not of our concern. What is of our concern is whether the scientist is strictly following his perception and his definition, and there is no internal contradiction in the subject per se.
KKG, I think Sana wanted to ask a question. He
Yeah,
raised his hand.
yes.
Sana,
Uh,
go ahead.
Dr. Sana?
Uh,
Yes, Dr. Sana. Yes, sir, we are able to hear you. You can speak.
yeah. Good evening, Krishnapani ji.
Good evening. Sir.
Yeah, it's wonderful to listen to you. Now, our experience in a society, is it an experience of joy or suffering? Don't you think is based on our approach to the society itself as inclusive entities or exclusive entities claiming a lot of privileges and monopoly?
Yes.
Don't you think so? It should be, when it is inclusive, I think it becomes a source of joy. That's how I want you to throw light on this.
You are absolutely right. You are Dr. Sana. See, our experience of, as you say, joy or sorrow or suffering is on account of how we perceive the society, how we experience that reality of that society. See, as you said, inclusive. See, if you make your own surroundings beautiful, obviously the surroundings gives you back its happiness, its its bounty to you. If you create a society which is limiting, is limiting and exclusive, and you don't care what is happening beyond your compound wall, then obviously you are limiting yourself and creating a society which is uh, making you suffer in that process. So that is why they said human being does not understand what is the tremendous amount of joy and happiness it gives in giving. So there's a beautiful story in one of the Upanishads, which I don't want to go into it, but the major human weakness has been recognized as greed and this acquisitiveness. This acquisitiveness and greed and wanting everything for myself is the major weakness in a human being, and that is the cause for untold misery and suffering in this world. We are all contributing that to it. We are all contributing it to that. So, as you rightly said, it's a question of inclusiveness and it's a question of sharing and actually more of giving than taking. Because any system can survive only when there is an increase of the total output. Otherwise, slowly that society or that system will deteriorate. So in order to sustain, more people should be giving than what each one is taking out of it. So that's your perception is very correct. We are creating that world around us, and we are not only making ourselves miserable, we are making everybody around also miserable.
Maybe this social distancing is a kind of a warning signal. If you don't know how to interact with the society as an inclusive entity, then better be you get locked down.
You will be isolated. You will be isolated.
I see. That's the warning.
Yes, it's a great warning. It's a great warning. I
Behave
don't know.
Behave well, and then get into the society. Otherwise, get locked up.
Yes. Obviously, what you say is correct, because see, I hope and pray. Let us all hope and pray that we as human beings learn the right kind of lessons once this lockdown is over.
Yes, very much.
Thank you so much.
A lot of lessons we are gaining. That is one benefit. Yeah,
Yes.
thank you.
We have a question from Gul Malani. Please go ahead.
Malani ji.
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
Krishnapani ji, your exposition was absolutely remarkable. Loved it. The thing that the transcendental state of just being is not possible to achieve that while you are in physical activity, either thought or in physical activity. Is that correct, or is that? Could you expound on it a little bit more?
You are. I would say that what you say is partially correct.
Uh-huh.
as I said, the first questioner, Mr. Suresh, has asked how can one become a third person to oneself.
Yes.
If we are able to loosen the hold of I, you can be a better observer of yourself. I can be a better observer of myself. So what happens is, in that loosening of the hold of I, you are giving a lot of space. You are giving a lot of opportunity for that intense sense of being descending upon oneself. So while you are carrying on your activities, while you are carrying on your daily activities, you are busy with your own things also, it is really possible. It's not something impossible. It is something very much possible. But the only thing is, as I said, don't give too much of self-importance. Don't give too much of importance to what you are doing. Don't be completely engrossed in what you are doing. Then what happens is your focus becomes very, very narrow. Your focus becomes exclusive, and you are terribly concerned about what you are doing now. That means if I am doing some work, I am terribly concerned about the consequences of that work. Will I get back what I am working for? I am looking for some kind of a reward. I am looking for some kind of a commercial transaction in all my activities. That's not necessary. You need not always see the left to the mind itself. It would always prefer to get into this mode of commercial activity of giving and taking, and always asking a question as to what is in it for me. Every thing that the mind does, it need not necessarily have this idea of what is in it for me. The moment you are in that mode of what is in it for me, you are into trouble.
Okay. All right.
Question
Next,
from Amir.
next,
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Amir,
Vijay Mirchandani ji, are there any examples of successful societies based on what you said, or failed societies for that matter? No, see, I would not like to really pinpoint some of these things, but one of the great strengths of the ancient Indian civilization, which is a continuing civilization for several thousands, for millennia, one of the main aspects of this, they have said, is the acceptance of everybody into its fold. Inclusiveness. Inclusiveness has been a major contributor to the sustenance and continuance of the ancient Indian civilization. See, it's not Indian per se, it's actually universal, which has evolved in a particular continent or in a particular geographical location. So this society, this civilization has thrived on that. We have some historical examples. They say that the Atlantic civilization did not survive on account of this. The Mayan or the Inca or the Sumerian or the Babylonian, or you have several such examples in history. There are theories and theories about it, but the fact of the matter that in this particular subcontinent which we call as India, we have an unbroken social order. Not that there were no disturbances, not that it was always hunky-dory and it was very peaceful and everything was good. No, but the issue of inclusiveness, the issue of tolerance, the issue of allowing that freedom to the individual, according to me, is what makes these societies, I wouldn't say successful, I would rather say sustainable societies.
I think Samir wants to ask a question.
Yeah, there is some gentleman called Abin. Sir, how do we come out from any personal insecurities,
Keki
or let's say fear of a change?
ji,
Oh,
I think Samir
this
wants
is a this is a very, very, very profound question. This is a very profound question. We can go into it in much depth at a later time, but again I will tell you, examine what is it that making you insecure. Please examine what is it that is making you insecure. See, life is a stream. But we as individuals want to make it as stable and as static as possible so that we are not disturbed from our comfort zone. Any disturbance from our comfort zone may make us feel insecure. So there is actually a spiritual law which says that the moment you are in a comfort zone, you are going to decay. So never be in your comfort zone. Never ever be in your comfort zone. Always be ready to face challenges. Always be ready to encounter what is new, what is fresh, what is something which you cannot predict. So otherwise what happens is, if you live in a comfort zone and any disturbance from that comfort zone makes you insecure, then fear enters. As you said, fear of change. If I want to change my job, I want 30% hike. I want better perquisites. I want better facilities. I want all kinds of things. And I may not get it. Or there could be a possibility of losing my existing job, which is actually a reality, which is happening, sir. Which is happening. You and I we do not realize how fortunate among millions, billions of these people in this world. See, unfortunately, the mind is something which gets used to statistics, but it is said that if you are having your 3 meals a day, your breakfast, lunch, and dinner, you are better than 400 crore people in this world. You and I are better than 400 crore people in this world. So just imagine what is the state of those 400 crore people who do not know when or how their next meal is going to come. So do we have any justification to feel insecure or fearful for our life? Because we have narrowed down our thinking process and our living, that we have lost that vastness. We are unable to see that vastness of life. Life is so vast, so beautiful in so many respects, and so ugly in so many other respects. But it's all one and the same. It's all the same stream of life. So unless we perceive that, we cannot come out of this insecurity and come out of this fear of change. This has to be something which has to be, deeply contemplated. We can go into this. This is a very, very, very useful and very interesting question. And one of the factors they say now in this pandemic and this lockdown is a substantial increase in mental illnesses, psychiatric disturbances, cases of which come under the psychologist's domain and the domain of the psychiatrist are tremendously increasing because of the inability to see the vastness of life. Then Samir, I've seen somewhere Mr. Stewart.
I wanted to ask a question. Samir Stewart, please go ahead.
Yes.
Yes,
Yes. Thank you so much, Krishnapannaji. This is absolutely outstanding. I heard you last week. I love your discourses.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. So I had a question for you about, when you're referring to meditation and being in the transcendental state. Now, meditation can often be defined as the space between two thoughts, and
Yes.
increasing the space between two thoughts
Yes.
to kind of be, to kind of quiet the mind. Now,
Yes.
for the most part, it is very difficult to remain in a transcendental state, as you yourself have acknowledged. Most of our reality is just as the first two categories that you described. It's subjective, and it's relative, and some of it is intensely personal. But if you want to make that transition to a transcendental state, and with the barrage of distractions that we have today, whether it is something going wrong, whether it's a WhatsApp message, whether it's an email, something from work. I mean, I find we're always reacting to things.
Yes.
With
Yes.
that sort of a situation, can you give us concrete examples of methods, maybe one or two ways by which we can, sort of quieten ourselves to move away from some of these existential realities, knowing that we have all this WhatsApp and everything else that's happening, something with the boss, something at home. We have to move away from that to get towards that point where you can actually experience that a little bit more and sustain it.
Yeah. See, you have reminded me of Jiddu Krishnamurti's statement, where he also talks about meditation as the silence between two thoughts. The silence between two thoughts, he calls it as meditation, and he says you
Yes.
have to expand that silence. You are
Yes.
absolutely right. See, the process of observation makes the frequency of thoughts to come down. When the frequency comes down, you are able to observe your own thoughts. And generally, I define thought as something in mathematical terms, I would call it as a vector. It has both magnitude and direction. In the sense, if we observe our own thoughts, we give energy to it and also direction to it. As we proceed, when one thought emerges, I add further energy to it because of my own, burden of my knowledge and memory.
Yes.
And then I also give it a particular direction. I want to take it into a particular direction. And that's why neurologists call this as forming of grooves in the brain. Electrochemical grooves are formed in the brain where you direct your thoughts in a particular way and flow in a particular direction. So these are the two problems, sir, with thought: giving of energy and directing that thought. So if you don't do this, if you don't give energy to a thought, and if you don't give it a direction, whatever energy the thought comes with, it is said that that thought will drop off on its own. And before the emergence of another thought, you have this space between two thoughts. And that exactly is what is also defined as meditation. Now, distraction, as you said, is again something which the mind wants. The mind cannot stay with itself. The mind always is driven with a sense of outwardness. The focus of the mind is always outward.
Yes.
So when the focus is outward, you are bound to have distractions only. You are bound to have only distractions. Now, it wants to succumb to those distractions because it likes those distractions. Whether it's a WhatsApp message, whether it's a email, or whether it's somebody else coming and talking to you, or you calling somebody, or you are just whiling away your time. So I would say, again, I would like to go back to Jiddu Krishnamurti when he would put a question and say, can you lead a totally purposeless life? Now, this is a very interesting question. It doesn't mean that we become vagabonds and we become burdens on the society and we become parasites on the society. No, it's not that. What he meant was, why is it that the mind is always in search of some purpose, some objective, something to acquire, something to hold on, something to grasp, something to take it for itself? Why do we think as human beings that the whole creation is for us? It's not for us. So this is the tendency of the mind which we have cultivated, which has evolved over millions of years, where we are now working, in the sense we are now caught in it. It appears as though we got caught in that state of mind, and that state of mind has to be questioned. We have to seriously question whether my state of mind is the right state of mind at all. And then that may show you some, way out from all our distractions.
Sir, if I can just add a small sort of follow-up to that.
Yeah.
I apologize for interrupting for any other questions. See,
No.
I actually went to a Jiddu Krishnamurti Foundation school.
Wonderful.
I love Jiddu Krishnamurti. I believe I try to live life based upon the principles of Jiddu Krishnamurti. But I find that it is increasingly difficult in today's world, and maybe it's a function of the incentives corporations give us, or maybe it's a function of just our environment, where you have to be pushing to kind of get things. If you I'm just giving you one example. You have to just push to get to get something done. We all know that nothing just happens on its own. and you just kind of get very caught up and embroiled in that process. And if you're observing your thought and your process at that point in time, you probably would not be pushing to kind of get things done. It's just one of those elements of conflict that you normally have in day-to-day life. So I'm just sort of wondering, I mean, there is a difference between what we experience day to day and the philosophy. And I think Jiddu Krishnamurti's philosophy is absolutely brilliant. It's an ideal that that one should strive to, but I find it still, even having gone to a Jiddu Krishnamurti Foundation school, when I went to school, I find it still difficult to implement some of his ideals in life. And that's something, I really appreciate what you're saying, but just one or two additional points of guidance will be useful.
See, one of the very unique ways which Jiddu Krishnamurti used to suggest is, why don't you question everything? Why do you accept? Why do you conform? Why do you simply follow the herd? If I want something,
yes,
and I am pushing for it, before doing that, why don't you question the nature of this want? Why does it want in the first place? Why is it that you want it? You had an experience, you want a repetition of that experience, you have acquired something, you want more of it. And then see, you have to go very deep into it. We have to question the motive of the thought process, this mindset as to why it wants more, why it wants to push itself to get something. Why does it want to get into that crowded space, which is where there are too many people grabbing the whole thing and not letting anybody live in a very conducive atmosphere? Samirji, because you said you have been to JK school and you are interested in that, we have a program tomorrow from 11:30 to 1.
Yes, I'm aware of it.
You are aware of it. There we will be talking more of it from the point of view of Jiddu Krishnamurti.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Janaki Ramji has given some prescription about contemplating and memorizing selected scriptural verses. Yeah, that's one way of looking at things afresh, where when you contemplate on what the scriptures say, it will give you an insight. It's not simply a question of repeating or memorizing, but it is a question of reading it with an insight. Once you read it with insight, you are able to, get a better understanding of things. I cannot immediately recall verse 30 of the 3rd chapter of Bhagavad Gita, but that's a way. See, these are all where whatever one is comfortable as an individual for understanding himself, that is going to help you. Mohit Dwivedi ji, how can I assess my position in the spiritual path? If time allows, please answer. My simple question is, the moment you want to assess your position, you are nowhere on the spiritual path. This question of trying to assess a position is again a mindset of what we have gone through throughout our unfortunate system of education. Somebody awarding a grade to you, somebody awarding marks to you, somebody telling you are here in a class of 50 students, you are the 3rd student, you are in the top 5% and all that. Sir, forget about position on the spiritual path. The first thing is, the presence of you is a great hindrance. The presence of I is a great hindrance on the spiritual path. The moment you want to measure something which is immeasurable, something which is of a different dimension altogether, you are far. You means, I'm not saying personally, whether it's you or me, the moment I talk in terms of assessing myself and my position, because that's a dimension which is infinite. Now, how can somebody tell you where are you or where am I in infinity? Infinity is infinity, which is of a totally different dimension altogether. So I would rather say, the moment you drop the overimportance to this I, then I think we are all beginning, or we'll be stepping or taking our first step on the spiritual path.
Can we take the last question from Srinivasa Murthy?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We have, I think, exceeded our time of 1 hour.
Yes,
But
yes,
anyway,
we
no
have.
problem.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Last question. Srinivasa?
Is there?
His hand is up, so I don't know. I don't see.
Srinivasa Murthy.
Yeah.
Hello, sir. Mr. Srinivasa Murthy.
Thank you, sir. No questions. Just I put my hand. Just
Oh, okay, sir. Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you so
everybody.
much.
Thank you all for your participation in today's webinar. We have actually 2 programs for you next week. We are going to do a program on the 21st April on Tuesday at 6 p.m. And we're going to have Mr. Achal Mehra, who is an expert in Hatha Yoga and has been practicing for 30 years. He's going to talk on yoga for immunity in these special times. And then again, on the 25th of April, which is the Friday, as usual, we are going to have Mr.
Is
Amit
it-
Dasgupta.
Is it
Who's
24th or 25th?
It's a Friday.
24th is Friday, I think.
24th, my mistake. 24th of April, we'll have Mr. Amit Dasgupta, who's an accomplished coach with over 40 years of professional corporate experience. He believes that Indian philosophy brings value to living life meaningfully and harmoniously. And he's going to talk to us about mind your mind. So thank you all so much. And we'll see you on Tuesday, followed after that on Friday. Thank you.
Thank you.